Welcome to the Nonfiction Insights channel.
Great to be here.
Today we're diving deep into a really influential book, Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, The Fates of Human Societies.
Ah, yes, the Pulitzer winner. Big topic.
It is.
And it all kicks off with this powerful question from a New Guinean man named Yali, doesn't it?
Right. He essentially asked Diamond, why did history unfold so differently on different continents? Why did Europeans arrive with so much cargo, as he put it?
It seems simple on the surface, but it's profound. And Diamond's whole project is about finding the deep roots of those differences, steering clear of, racist explanations. He's after the ultimate long-term causes.
Exactly. Yali's question about cargo. It's about the stark difference in material wealth and power between, say, Europeans and New Guineans at the point of contact.
And Diamond uses this to introduce the idea of proximate versus ultimate causes. That's crucial to his argument, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So proximate causes are the immediate reasons. Like when Pizarro conquered the Incas, his soldiers had steel swords, horses, guns, and they brought diseases. Those are the proximate factors.
The things right there on the surface.
Yeah.
The how it happened at that moment.
Exactly. The guns, the germs, the steel, they were the tools of conquest, the immediate advantages.
But Diamond says, okay, why did Europeans have those things? Why didn't the Incas sail to Europe and conquer Spain? That's where the ultimate causes come in.
Precisely. He's digging deeper. What underlying long-term factors led to Europeans developing those specific proximate advantages and not other societies?
And his answer really comes down to environment and geography, right?
That's the bedrock of his argument. He argues that the environmental differences between the continents are the ultimate explanation for the divergent historical paths. It's not about the people, but the places.
So what kind of environmental differences are we talking about?
A huge one is the availability of wild plants and animals suitable for domestication. This was massively unequal across the globe.
Okay, so finding things you can actually farm and herd.
Yeah. Think about the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. Diamond points out it was uniquely blessed.
How so? What made it special?
Well, it had this Mediterranean climate, perfect for annual grasses like wheat and barley plants that put a lot of energy into big seeds. Plus, it had a high concentration of different species that could be domesticated all in one place.
Like a Head Start package for agriculture.
Kind of, yeah. And many of the key plants there were self-pollinating, which made it easier for early farmers to select the best seeds and improve crops relatively quickly.
Okay, so the Fertile Crescent hit the jackpot. What about elsewhere?
Big contrast. The Americas, for example, had maize, which was a phenomenal crop eventually, but took much longer to domesticate from its wild ancestor teosinte, and Australia. Very few native plants suitable for intensive agriculture.
And animals. That's the other half of domestication.
Huge difference there, too. Eurasia had something like 72 large mammal candidates for domestication. Think cows, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, the animals that transformed Eurasian societies.
Wow, 72. And the Americas.
Far fewer. Many large mammals went extinct there after the last ice age. They were left with the llama and alpaca, useful but not quite game changers like the horse or cow. Africa had quite a few candidates, 51 maybe, but many proved impossible to domesticate. Think zebras, African buffaloes, very tough animals.
Australia again.
Basically none of the big domesticable mammals.
Oh,
Kangaroos.
yeah.
Not really suitable for plowing or riding into battle.
So this disparity in basic building blocks, the plants and animals had massive knock-on effects.
Absolutely. It determined where intensive agriculture could arise early and easily and where it couldn't, or where it developed much later.
And Diamond connects this to the shape of the continents, too, the whole axis idea.
Right, the east-west axis of Eurasia versus the north-south axis of the Americas and Africa. This is a really clever point.
Explain that. Why does the axis matter?
Okay, so Eurasia stretches primarily east to west. If you domesticate wheat or a cow in the Fertile Crescent, it can spread relatively easily eastward and westward because places along the same latitude share similar day lengths, climates, seasons.
Ah, so the crops and animals are likely to thrive across a vast area.
Exactly. So innovations related to farming could diffuse rapidly across Eurasia. But now look at the Americas or Africa, they stretch north to south.
Meaning lots of different climate zones.
Precisely. A crop domesticated in, say, Mexico might not grow well in the Andes or in temperate North America. Same for animals. The climate barriers are much greater. Plus, you have geographical choke points like Panama, or deserts and rainforests acting as barriers.
So diffusion of agriculture, animals, and the technologies associated with them was just inherently slower and more difficult in the Americas and
Oh,
Africa.
that's the argument. Slower spread, less interconnectedness compared to Eurasia.
And continental size and population matter too.
Yes, Eurasia is the largest landmass with the largest historical populations. More people, more potential innovators, more societies interacting and competing, which can drive technological development faster.
Okay, so environment sets the stage. Let's talk consequences. Food production, agriculture, and herding. What happens when societies adopt that?
It's a fundamental shift. People stop moving around constantly and settle down. Villages grow, populations become denser.
And crucially, you get surplus food.
Bingo. For the first time, consistently, societies can produce more food than they need for immediate survival. And that surplus changes everything.
How so? What does surplus enable?
Well, if not everyone has to farm or hunt all day, some people can specialize. You get artisans, priests, soldiers, chiefs, bureaucrats.
Social stratification starts to emerge, hierarchies.
Exactly. And you can support these non-food producers. This leads to more complex political structures, chiefdoms, eventually states needed to manage resources, organize labor, perhaps build irrigation systems, or wage war.
And the domesticated animals weren't just burgers and steaks, right?
Oh, far from it. In Eurasia, animals were revolutionary. Horses provided military power, think Cortez, Pizarro, and fast transport. Oxen pulled plows, dramatically increasing how much land could be farmed.
More food, more surplus.
Right. And then there's what Diamond calls the secondary products revolution, using animals not just for meat after they're killed, but for things while they're alive.
Like milk.
Oh,
The goals.
exactly. Milk, cheese, yogurt, wool for textiles, using their dung for fertilizer, using their muscle power for transport and plowing. This massively amplified the impact of animals in Eurasia.
An advantage largely missing in the Americas due to the lack of suitable animals.
Correct. Llamas could carry packs, but you couldn't ride them into battle or use them to pull a plow effectively.
Okay, this leads us to maybe the grimmest part of the argument. Germs.
Yeah, this is stark. Diamond argues that the major infectious diseases that have plagued human history, smallpox, measles, influenza, bubonic plague, mostly originated in the Old World, specifically Eurasia.
And why there?
Because of the long history of dense human populations living in very close proximity to their numerous domesticated animals, many of these diseases were originally animal diseases that mutated and jumped to humans.
So living cheek by jowl with cows, pigs, sheep, goats, chickens created a sort of disease incubator.
Essentially, yes. Over centuries, Eurasian populations developed some degree of immunity or resistance to these crowd diseases through repeated exposure.
But in the Americas,
The situation was completely different. Fewer domesticated animals, generally less dense populations in many areas, meant they simply hadn't co-evolved with this same suite of deadly microbes.
so when Europeans arrived,
It was catastrophic. They brought these diseases with them, inadvertently. Smallpox, measles, flu. These swept through Native American populations who had zero prior exposure and thus zero immunity.
the death tolls were staggering, weren't they?
Unimaginable. In many areas, 90%, even 95% of the indigenous population died, primarily from disease, not warfare. It utterly shattered societies even before major conflicts began. Hispaniola's population collapse is a horrifying example.
It's easy to see how that would be a massive factor in the European conquests.
A devastating proximate factor stemming from that ultimate cause of different histories of animal domestication and population density.
Though it wasn't entirely a one-way street with germs, was it?
No, that's an important nuance. Tropical diseases in the Old World, like malaria and yellow fever, posed huge challenges to Europeans trying to colonize parts of Africa and Asia. These acted as a barrier.
And eventually, those diseases made their way to the Americas, too, causing problems there.
Yes, particularly once the transatlantic slave trade began, bringing new disease vectors and pathogens. The difficulties building the Panama Canal, largely due to malaria and yellow fever, show their impact.
Okay, let's shift gears to technology. How does Diamond approach innovation?
He kind of flips the common wisdom, necessity is the mother of invention. He argues it's often the other way around.
Invention is the mother of necessity.
Sort of. He suggests inventions often arise somewhat randomly, maybe as curiosities, and then societies figure out a need for them. Edison's phonograph is his go-to example. Edison wasn't initially sure what it was good for. Music recording came later.
Interesting. So it's not just about having the bright idea, it's about whether society adopts it and spreads it.
Exactly. Acceptance and diffusion are key. Why does one society adopt a new technology while another ignores it?
What factors influence that?
Things like perceived advantage. Is it obviously better than what exists? Economic incentives. Social values. Is the society open to change? Compatibility with existing systems. He mentions how Britain was slow to adopt electric streetlights because they already had a massive investment in gas lighting.
Whereas cannons were adopted pretty quickly once their power was demonstrated.
Right. And again, geography plays a role in diffusion.
How so? With technology.
Similar to agriculture, the east-west axis of Eurasia allowed technologies, once developed, to spread more readily. Things like the wheel, writing systems, they could travel across similar climates and interconnecting societies.
Whereas in the Americas, the wheel existed, but mostly just for toys, right? It didn't spread as a major transport technology.
Correct. The geographical barriers, mountains, deserts, rainforests, the north-south axis made diffusion harder. Same for writing. It was independently invented in Mesoamerica and maybe the Andes, but it didn't spread across the entire hemisphere like writing systems did across much of Eurasia.
He also makes a point about independent invention versus borrowing, doesn't he?
Yeah, he suggests that once a complex idea like writing or the alphabet is developed somewhere, its spread might actually preempt independent invention elsewhere because it's often easier to adapt an existing system than to invent one from scratch.
Like the alphabet, which was adapted and modified across many cultures.
Precisely. Those key innovations using signs for consonants, a fixed order, memorable letter names made it incredibly adaptable and easy to learn, facilitating its spread.
Okay, moving towards larger societal structures. Diamond uses categories like bands, tribes, chiefdoms, states.
Yeah, it's a simplified model, he admits, but useful. Bands are small, nomadic hunter-gatherer groups. Tribes are larger, often settled villagers, but still relatively egalitarian. Chiefdoms have hereditary leaders, more inequality, redistribution of goods. And states are larger, centralized, bureaucratic, with laws, taxes, monopolies on force.
And the link back to food production.
It's fundamental. You generally need the food surpluses and population densities generated by agriculture to support the complexity of chiefdoms and especially states. Hunter-gatherer bands just don't have the resources or numbers for that kind of organization.
So food production enables denser populations, specialization, and then these more complex political units emerge to manage it all.
Right. And states, with their organization and resources, are often much more effective at waging war and expanding.
He also talks about how larger units form through amalgamation.
Yes, basically, merging smaller units into bigger ones. This can happen voluntarily, maybe under threat from a common enemy, or more often through conquest.
Like the Zulu example.
Exactly. Shaka Zulu used innovative military tactics and political consolidation to forge a powerful state from many smaller groups in southern Africa. It's an example of rapid state formation through conflict and organization.
And he briefly contrasts China and Europe in this context.
Yeah, suggesting China's geography may be favored earlier and more lasting unification into a large state, whereas Europe's fragmented geography mountains, peninsulas encouraged chronic disunity and competition among smaller states.
Which had very different long-term consequences for their global roles later on.
Indeed.
Now, Australia, you mentioned it earlier. Why is it such an important test case for his theory?
Because it was a large continent, isolated for a long time, and its indigenous societies were primarily hunter-gatherers when Europeans arrived. They didn't have farming, metal tools, writing in the Eurasian sense.
Which tragically was used by some to justify racist ideas.
Right. But Diamond argues this wasn't about the people, it was about the environment. Australia simply lacked the suite of domesticable plants and animals that fueled agricultural revolutions elsewhere.
And the indigenous Australians were incredibly skilled at managing their existing environment, weren't they?
Absolutely. Techniques like fire stick farming were sophisticated ways of manipulating the landscape to encourage useful plants and attract game. They were highly adapted hunter-gatherers. But the raw materials for an agricultural society like Eurasia's just weren't there.
And when Europeans came?
They brought the entire package, the wheat, the sheep, the cattle, the horses, the technology, the political systems from Eurasia. It underscores his point. The outcomes were deeply tied to those initial environmental endowments. Australia itself didn't provide the means for that specific pathway of development.
It's a powerful argument, but like any big theory, it's had criticisms, right?
Yeah,
It can feel a bit deterministic.
definitely. Critics point out that environment isn't everything. Culture matters. Individual choices and actions, think of specific inventors or leaders, matter. Historical accidents, contingency. Things could have gone differently.
The QWERTY keyboard example, not the most efficient layout, but it's stuck due to historical path dependency.
Exactly. So while Diamond provides a compelling framework for the broad patterns, it doesn't explain every detail or deny human agency. It's about the ultimate large-scale forces that shape the world map of power and wealth we inherited.
And it's crucial to remember his goal isn't to say states are better than tribes or farmers are better than hunter-gatherers.
Not at all. His aim is scientific explanation to understand why history played out the way it did, offering an alternative to biased explanations based on supposed inherent differences between peoples.
So wrapping it up, the big takeaway from Guns, Germs, and Steel is that the vast differences in societal development across continents weren't due to innate differences in the people,
But rather stemmed largely from differences in geographical luck and environmental potential, especially regarding the plants and animals available for domestication.
which then cascaded through food production, population density, disease evolution, technological diffusion, and political organization over millennia.
It's a grand, sweeping narrative connecting seemingly disparate parts of the human story.
And we've really just scratched the surface here. There's so much more detail and nuance in the book itself. Hopefully, this deep dive has given a good sense of the core ideas.
Yeah, what stands out most to you from Diamond's argument? Does it raise new questions for you?
It certainly makes you think about the deep influence of factors we don't always consider, the long shadow of environmental history.
It really does. It pushes us beyond simple answers and highlights those intricate links between our environment and how our societies have developed.
Well, thank you for joining us for this exploration on Nonfiction Insights.
Please subscribe to the Nonfiction Insights channel for more deep dives into fascinating and important books.